All right, good morning, gentles and lady men. It is the beginning of Biology Exploration 2, Cell Structure and Function, and right now we're going to look at 2.1 Cell Discovery. All right, we're going to start with a timeline. In the Middle Ages, looking at the first microscopes. The first microscopes were very simple. They just consisted of one lens, so essentially magnifying glasses. Now that lens was of a convex style. So let me show you the two styles of lenses we typically have in microscopes. We've got a convex lens that you see here, and the convex lens is kind of rounded on the outside, and we've got the concave lens which kind of caves in on the inside. So the convex is thicker in the middle, the concave is thinner in the middle, and our first microscopes or magnifying glasses were made of this convex variety. Now in about 1590, a father-son duo, Hans and Zacharias Janssen, were the first to invent kind of the microscopes we use today, compound microscopes. What made it a compound was that it was made of two or more lenses. In this original compound microscope here, there would have been a lens located here and a lens located here. And what that does is it allows for the bending of light 2 times to kind of focus it in your eye and make objects appear even larger. The lenses could be convex or concave. Most of the compound microscopes we use today are two convex lenses, but some of them, for example, Galileo, used some concave designs as well. All right, about 75 years later, Robert Hooke came on the scene, and he was using the Jensen's design, essentially. And he's the guy who actually was looking at some cork bark and coined the term cells. He thought the cork bark looked like it was made up of a bunch of tiny rooms, and the little tiny rooms in a monastery were known as cells. But probably his greatest contribution was this book, Micrographia. You can see here's a demonstration page or an example page from Micrographia. Robert Hooke was a very detail-oriented person, and when he looked in his microscopes, he'd draw what he saw and came up with these amazing pictures, labeled and all. It's quite an incredible book. You should take a look at it. The artwork is great. All right, not much longer after Robert Hooke, this Dutch scientist or naturalist Anton van Leeuwenhoek came on the scene, and this guy did a ton. First off, he built his own microscopes. This is one of his microscopes here. They're quite small, and that's where the lens is. These are actually a simple design, but their magnification power was well over 400x, or magnified things 400 times. Some things about Anton. He was the first person to ever see bacteria, which are incredibly small. He was also the first person to ever see sperm cells wiggling about. With this is some diagrams of sperm cells there. He described microscopic animals as wee beasties cavorting about, and I always liked this. He basically looked at some pond water and saw things swimming around in there. He's known today as the father of modern microscopy because he developed a bunch of special stains so that he could see things in a cell that other people weren't seeing. And we still use some of his stains today. And in fact, in class, we're going to be using some stains so that we can see some of the clear cell parts as well. Just going to casually mention Robert Brown. Robert Brown didn't add a whole lot to our understanding of cells, but he did coin the term nucleus of the cell. And before that, it wasn't that people weren't saying it, it's just we didn't have one kind of unified word to describe what it is, what this structure was. Before that, some people referred to it as the nut or the kernel of the cell. All right, now all of this kind of led to eventually the cell theory. And there were 3 more scientists here that helped kind of flesh out the cell theory. That is kind of our working understanding of cells to this day. First was Theodor Schwann. He was a German scientist that stated that all animals are made of cells. He also happened to have his name attached to things like the Schwann cells, which are part of our neurons or our brain cells. Matthias Schleiden, another German, stated that all plants are made of cells. He was essentially a botanist, and when he looked at plants, he said, hey, you know, all of these plants, they're kind of made of cells. So I'm going to suggest that every plant out there is actually made of cells. And then finally in 1857, we had this guy right here, Rudolf Virchow, who was actually a doctor. And what he said is really important. He said that every cell that we have comes about because another cell divided and gave us that cell. In other words, all cells come from pre-existing cells through cellular division, which means if you kind of follow that logic back in time, it means that every cell has to have come from some sort of original cell. All right, let's take a look at what the cell theory actually states. It states that all living things are composed of cells. As of right now, we don't know of any living things that are not made of cells. 2, cells are the basic units of structure and function in all living things. That is, things are made of cells and they are alive and function because the cells function. And then finally, all cells come from pre-existing cells, what Mr. Furco said. Join us next for 2.2 Microscopes.